Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udikang. It's the show where we chat about business analysis and project management issues and the challenges and triumphs within those fields. It's inspiring, informative, and very much inquisitive. My guest today is an ordained minister who happens to be also a Salesforce guru. He is a 7-time certified Salesforce professional and trailhead ranger. He's been a business analyst, senior director, chief information officer, essentially helping leaders and organizations analyze and optimize systems and processes in the nonprofit sector. So please help me welcome to today's show, joining us all the way from Tennessee, David Limiero. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm glad to be on your show today.
I'm glad to have you. I should start off by asking perhaps the obvious. How and why did you get involved with using Salesforce?
Yes, I am a classic example of what you'd call an accidental admin. I came on in a leadership role in Stadia, the organization I serve now, about 14 years ago. And that was the world of having Excel spreadsheets with different lists of the people, the pastors who were starting these churches. And the list on one person's laptop was different than the other person's laptop. And a friend said, "Hey, did you know Salesforce exists? And the second most important thing for us at that stage in a nonprofit, that you get 10 licenses for free." And so we started. I didn't do the initial implementation, but I very clearly saw the need for, at that point, what we would call a glorified Rolodex. For those of you old enough to remember a Rolodex, an address book of contacts and accounts, and to make sure we at least had a consistent group of people, that we had all the current information and the ability to contact those people via email or phone or things like that. So always had a technical bent growing up as a kid. My dad's an engineer. Actually, 2 of my children are engineers, but really fell into Salesforce really accidentally, like so many people have, as I've listened to podcasts like this.
Fantastic. Now you work with a company called, is it Stadia or Stadia?
Stadia.
Stadia. Now it's a nonprofit organization. What are some of the services that Stadia provides?
Yeah, so Stadia's vision is that every child on the planet would have a church. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We do that globally, and then we do that here domestically in the United States. And so I tell my technology friends, and probably the kind of people listening to this podcast, that on the US side, we're a startup incubator and venture capital firm for spiritual entrepreneurs. So we provide all kinds of services. We provide training, coaching, leadership development, project management. Starting a church from scratch is essentially a very large project management exercise. And so we have on-team project managers who lead people through that, experienced people who coach them, support services, not just for the man or the woman who's starting the church, but for their spouse and family. All kinds of things like that, and have essentially developed a real core of these quality services, to the point that, in the church starting world, about 50% of the churches that are started will be closed within 3 years overall. Stadia's got a record that about 90% or more of the ones we start are still healthy and growing after 5 years. And so we've just developed all these systems and processes over this time period. And on the global sense, a little bit unique, we partner with indigenous leaders in those countries.
Okay.
And so very often, very talented, gifted people understand their context and culture. We're not trying to impose North American culture or North American Christian culture on those people. Very often it's a matter of a shortage of resources. And so we're able to accelerate things they're already doing. And in many places around the globe, not all of our global work, we are also sponsoring children. And so to date, we've sponsored over 40,000 kids worldwide, and that number continues to grow every year. Much of that in Latin America, some of that in Africa. And we're just continuing to look for what we call in-country partners that are sort of catalytic leaders that we can come alongside and help and encourage in their own journey.
Oh, fantastic. It's always good to help. As a business analyst at Stadia, you've been involved with, process discovery, process design, redesign using Salesforce. Maybe you can take us through how you develop some of these processes and how this adds value to Stadia.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with the value add first. I think for anybody in the not-for-profit world, and this is true in the for-profit world with lean management and all of these techniques as well, right? We're looking for ways to eliminate waste. We're looking for ways where we can, in the not-for-profit world, make better use of our donor dollars. In the for-profit world, generate more profit, reduce the costs. And so kind of early on in my work at Stadia, I just began to see we were rapidly scaling. And I just began to ask myself and later our team, if God was going to bless us with 10 times the volume that we have right now, what would break? And let's fix it now so that if he so chose to bless us that way in the future, we're not the ones standing in the way. And so that pretty naturally led to process mapping. And didn't really know what I was doing, honestly. I grabbed a Lucid chart program and started trying to map some things, and got confused by all the different flowchart symbols and business process modeling notation. And I mean, there's a role for that. Yeah. But eventually came across a product called Elements.cloud and connected with Ian Gotts, who's one of the principal leaders in that corporation, and begin to understand a simple way of making process maps, not just for the sort of in the trenches detail level, but also kind of at that high level executive space.
I have to say amen to that.
Yeah, and I think one of the driving factors for me in our really first attempt at process modeling was technical debt. So one of the things that we mentioned here in the US, we're this incubator for spiritual entrepreneurs. And so we have these men and women who are applying and going through a process we call discovery, which is really a recruitment process with multiple interviews and multiple surveys and things like that. And so back in 2014, we had an outside consultant build us a visual force and tabs community, gave us a Word document, made some Lucid charts that we built ourselves to try to figure out what's going on. But then over time, what happened, we had some changes, some updates, some fixes. None of that was really documented. And this is one of our core business processes. Obviously, as a not-for-profit, raising money is one of our core business process, but for us, raising leaders is a core business process. And so I needed to get my head around what was that process and how did the metadata in Salesforce connect to that? Because I found myself every time we needed to make a change, having to spend hours and hours going back and trying to figure out where was it and what that Word document, well, there was this revision of that Word document and where was it stored? And so that was the first process we tackled, was this whole process we call discovery, which is someone finds out about us, fills out a form on the web, goes through about 7 different major steps to get to a point where we can say, yes, we recommend you to be someone who starts a brand new congregation.
Oh, fantastic. Now you've been a CIO, Chief Information Officer, involved with developing and implementing technology strategy, essentially, a bit of what you've explained. What type of strategy goes into using Salesforce to attain these business objectives, and how do you implement that strategy?
Yeah, my team has a mission statement of our own, and we say that we are experts and equippers who leverage platforms and processes to free up people for mission.
I like that.
Yeah, and so I think what happened in the early years when we were a small organization, 8 to 10 people, my role was really an expert. That's why I've got 7 Salesforce certifications as an accidental admin. After a while, I had to say, I need to go figure out actually what I'm doing. But in recent years, really in the last 3 years, as our staff team has scaled and our volunteer team has scaled, really moving into equipping. And so we kind of primarily do that, Marcus, in 2 ways. We developed an internal team we call the Hub. And I think every organization has sort of your sales people, relational people, and then you have your sort of sales op, more implementation type people. And so we had never really gathered our implementers together in any kind of consistent forum. And so about 2 years ago, we started to do that and really say, we want you to be the point person for not just tech support, but platform needs, Salesforce and others, representing your team. And we're going to get together monthly. We're going to share ideas, best practices. We're going to do training. We built a certification process using Trailhead and some other things like that. And then the second thing that we did is we worked really hard on building front-end documentation. And so we have an internal website, we call it the Nucleus. And you go there and you want to look up an article on how do I upload a Conga template for this particular acknowledgement letter to new donors, and there's an article. Or how do I set up this particular opportunity record type for this particular business process? And so we've really tried to decentralize and focus on equipping. And then as part of that equipping, we can talk about this as well at some point, came across a team of volunteers back in November of 2019, and all moms trying to re-enter the workforce and wanting to learn Salesforce. And so over the life of that, we've had 7 of those folks, and 3 are now full-time employed in Salesforce jobs, and the 4th one will be just waiting on her start date in the next couple of weeks. So that's been another thing that's been really fun, just for me personally, and been a huge benefit for our team to enlist volunteers.
Fantastic. Now with Stadia, you've adopted this sort of cloud-based system, like you've explained. You've implemented apps like Salesforce, obviously Box, DocuSign. You even mentioned Conga and Exact Target. Maybe you can give us an idea of the steps that you took to implement that adoption.
Yeah, we were a little bit unique. In 2010, we had 2 sort of predecessor organizations that came together into a single organization. And we were unique in 2010, I think, not unique, but certainly unusual in already being fully remote. And so we, at that point, prior to 2010, had a small office in Northern California, had an Access database. But in order to, reduce real estate costs, and also just because our team was spread out all over the United States, we've never had an office since then. We don't own any desks, we don't own any real estate. Nice. And so we were really cloud-based from the beginning. We did have a predecessor org that had an on-site Microsoft Exchange server, but we made that transition to Office 365 and being cloud-based there. And so Salesforce is really our first cloud app in moving away from Access to that, and then gradually adding in the other apps over time.
I was going to say, oh, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Been fully remote since 2010, so
nice.
A long time.
Nice. I was going to say, whoever uses Access anymore? Probably a few people, but not
I imagine there are. I have a friend who's a file maker Mac database specialist and is still employed. So who knows?
Who knows? Interesting. I used Access, Visual Basic with an Access years ago, like I'm sure many people did. Now, what in the case of Stadia, are you guys focused more on the sales side of Salesforce or the service side of Salesforce?
Yeah, I would say sales is definitely the place that we're focused. The service side for us is our internal tech support, both for our employees and also our customer community, or Experience Cloud, as we now get to say, instead of Community Cloud, still learning that new lingo. So really from the not-for-profit perspective, we treat any kind of ask that we're making is captured in an opportunity. Okay. And so that could be an opportunity for a specific financial ask in a variety of different ways. It could be a person who fills out a online form interested in participating in the recruiting process with Stadia. And that goes through a various series of opportunities. We've got opportunities that we use when someone is going through our plan of development, where we're giving them learning and coaching and all those kind of things. And so we were really built around an opportunity model of using the Sales Cloud along those ways. Nice. So that's the only difference is, right, we're not selling things, we're asking for donations. And I always tell people it's a specific ask for a specific something by a specific date. That's what we consider to be an opportunity. Okay,
nice. Now you mentioned also as a nonprofit organization, Stadia is heavily involved with volunteers. I mean, that's how you guys run. It's not nonprofit, obviously. And now when it comes to training with Salesforce, and you mentioned you are training some folks, is there sort of a formal training process you go through, or is it sort of just learning skills on the job?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's a little bit of each. We've been working on and have in our Nucleus wiki a Salesforce 101 and a Salesforce 201, which we use for all employees. And some of that includes links out to Trailhead modules and things like that. When we get to what we call our hub, which is these sort of sales op type implementation people, we have strongly encouraged them to finish the reports and dashboard super badge, because we find most of the business needs they're doing are about reporting and dashboard creation. When we talk about volunteers coming in specifically to be equipped in how to learn Salesforce so that they can be fully employed and use this as real life job experience, That's much more of an informal mentoring. Most of them are already super aggressive in their own trailhead. They're going to, live trailhead events and trailhead webinars. We're providing real life experience and sort of saying, okay, here's a business team. Let's sit down with them, and you're going to figure out what are their needs, what are they trying to accomplish, and then how do we do the work of business analysis. Started with very small admin tasks all the way to they built an entire app with dashboards and reports and everything for from the ground up, meeting with the business team on day one all the way to delivering a product. And so lots of OJT in that sense.
Yeah. Actually, I'm curious because you talked about reports and dashboards, and there's a lot of plugins into Salesforce like Marketo or Eloqua. Some of these plugins can enhance the reports. Do you folks use any of these types of plugins to?
We really don't. The only really reporting tool that we use other than native Salesforce reporting is Conga.
Okay. All right.
We've got several, multi-object. So, for example, just in a when we start churches, we start them in all 50 states in the United States. They need articles of incorporation. They need bylaws. They need all kinds of things like that. So we use Conga for sort of those more detailed kind of reports. But we found in general that the native Salesforce reporting tools have been really solid for us. And dashboards seem to be working well, and really haven't seen a need for more advanced tools.
Any churches out in Canada you guys have opened up?
We don't specifically have any currently in Canada that would be new.
Okay.
There's some other organizations that focus on Canada that we partner with occasionally, but we've mostly been focused on the US and then other countries.
Yeah, you got to get out there to Canada, man.
Yeah.
Sometime. Yeah, cool.
Love to do so.
Now I mentioned earlier, and you also mentioned that you've got 7 Salesforce certifications. I got to ask you, how long did it take you to get all these? And any advice for those aspiring individuals who want to attain Salesforce certifications?
Sure. I was an admin for 4 years before I even really understood that there was certification and that I could try it. And I think I had the fortune of being the solo admin. And so to get that first admin cert and the app builder cert, that meant I got to touch all aspects of Salesforce.
Okay.
When I went to a one-day sort of live event in San Francisco back, probably 2014, I think, sort of prep for that exam, I sat next to a woman, same town as me, who worked for a large healthcare conglomerate, and her entire Salesforce job was reports. And so she'd never touched large portions of Salesforce. And so one thing I would say is if you do work for a larger company and you have a very specialized role, then finding a not-for-profit or some other org where you can really sort of touch everything is fantastic work for certification. Nice. So my certification is all pre-Trailhead, interestingly. So, I sort of maybe an assumption right now that Trailhead is a place you should spend a lot of time. Absolutely agree with that, but it didn't exist when I was there.
Yeah.
So after I got my my admin certs, and surprisingly I passed on the first time. Everybody told me that wouldn't happen, and I was as shocked as anybody else when it happened. I then, went the app builder route and then the advanced admin, and then had an opportunity back before it was called Trailhead. It was called Salesforce University.
Oh, okay.
And so I went out for a week and had an excellent instructor and spent 5 days in Las Vegas and, learned Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Community Cloud consulting all in 1 week. And again, I don't know if I'm a good test taker or whatever, but was able to pass those exams. And then later on added the email specialist for Marketing Cloud because we've been using Marketing Cloud way back since it was Exact Target. And I'm not a marketer, but I felt like I needed to have sort of a basic understanding. And so one thing I would say is, and I tell, I've heard this from other consultants as well, is having 7 certifications does not make you an expert in those 7 things. We're getting our summer 21 release here this weekend, and I don't even know how many pages there are in the release notes just for Sales Cloud. So I always encourage people, find a place where you enjoy focusing It's fine to have multiple certifications, but the reality is you're probably going to be a really good expert in one or two things, and you'll have enough knowledge to have informed conversations about other things. So even though I was a community cloud consultant, when we first built out our community cloud, now Experience Cloud, we hired an external consultant to do it for us. Because I knew that for me to scale up to that level of expertise, having not really touched that since I got that cert a few years earlier, wouldn't serve us best. And so I think knowing your limits and knowing your passions and proficiencies is really important as you look at your journey.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Now, you mentioned that you were at a conference 2014. Was that the Dreamforce conference you were talking about?
Yeah, I was at Dreamforce, and there was a
okay.
pre-training one day
Yeah.
sort of, hey, if you've been an admin and you want to go for the cert, there's a 1 day, 8-hour training. That's the first one I took, and I took my first cert in Dreamforce in 2014.
Yeah, I was at the Dreamforce 2014 and the 2013. In fact, I actually, when I was attending that conference, there were some sessions, some training sessions where you could go, for example, reports and dashboards. And so you'd go in for an hour or two and they'd take you through from, they just take sections of it. But I remember seeing that advertisement saying that if you wanted that certification, you could take that 8 hours of training, whatever, beforehand. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
that's
and
really
I don't know, currently with COVID and post-COVID, what's available online and offline, but I do know that, I think they call it Trailhead University or Trailhead Live now. It does have some options beyond just the online version of Trailhead where you can get some interactive training with real people, which I think it's at points is really helpful.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Now, 20 years as a minister, you have experience, 20 years as a minister. Any type of skills from the ministry experience that you've incorporated working with Salesforce?
Sure, that's a great question, and it might not seem really obvious. I mentioned our mission statement as a team is to be both experts and equippers. And so a lot of what I did in my 20 years as a pastor was teaching and training and coaching people. So back then it was about, spiritual aspects of their lives, marriage and family issues, those kinds of things. And so a large portion of what I do now is using those same skills of leading small groups and doing one-on-one coaching and mentoring and, teaching, not in the sense of, sitting in front of a classroom and lecturing, but sort of that one-on-one teaching or small group teaching, sort of on-the-job training kind of teaching. I think the other interesting thing, I never really thought about till this conversation, is a lot of what I was doing as a pastor was trying to have a pulse on needs of the people in my congregation. And then helping to understand, how can we help them with those needs, spiritual needs and practical needs. And so really, there's a pretty good translation into my role as an analyst right now, in the sense that we still have teams that have needs. And we used to talk about in the ministry side, people's felt needs and their real needs. And so very clearly the same thing happens. A team feels a need for something, and they might even think they know the solution, but there's usually something deeper than that. And I coach some of the admins on our team now that we don't want to be order takers. We want our teams to say, what's the goal you're trying to achieve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And let us help you translate that felt need into something that we can build or update for you to meet the actual business need.
So like an extension of a mentor, a guide, a servant leader. You're not there to tell people what to do, you're there to advise them. Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely. And we're big on it. And that was the way when I was a pastor, I did the same thing. It was very much of a come alongside servant leader. Obviously spoke from the front on a Sunday morning, but most of what I consider the core of what I did happened Monday through Saturday.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, thanks, David. It's been a pleasure having you. Anyway, if anyone from the audience wants to get in touch with you, any way that they can do so?
Yeah, absolutely. You can probably reach me most effectively by email. It is david.limero, Limiero, at stadiachurchplanting.org. You can also find me on our website, which again is stadiachurchplanting.org. I do have Twitter, but I am not a huge social media. I'm at David Limiero. Again, the spelling is Limiero. You can reach me that way as well. I'm just not as likely to respond as quickly on that social media as I am with a direct email message. So.
Great. Sounds great. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, nice to have a conversation today, Marcus. Appreciate you having me, and look forward to listening to your future episodes.
Great, great, David. Well, have yourself a wonderful day in Tennessee.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
And now a word from our sponsors. The Lewis Institute provides an enterprise project management program that does more than just train PMs. It helps support them from the CEO level on down. These courses help certify project leaders and prepare them to pass the PMP exam. The Business Agility Institute provides Emergence, the Journal of Business Agility. This quarterly publication brings you inspiring stories from the most innovative companies. Use the promo code ANALYST to get a 10% discount on your annual subscription.